Hi everybody. Today we're going to look at just a couple old Chinese dynasties as well as this philosophy of Confucianism. It's not a religion, it's more just a philosophy, but it was very influential for many Chinese dynasties, especially the Tang and Song dynasties, which you can see lasted for about 650 years. Another thing to add is that a dynasty, if you're not familiar, is simply a group that dominates for a long time. This could include a lot of different things. You can think of dynasties today, even if you don't think of them as parts of history. There are sports dynasties. The New England Patriots have been a football dynasty for about a decade now. The Chicago Bulls were a dynasty for a while. Tons of families have been dynasties in the United States, not as rulers, but as just wealthy people, the Vanderbilts, for example. So we'll look at ruling families for China. These families ruled each for about 300 years, and the Tang name is simply the name of that family. So each of these families had at some point a ruler that was an emperor. In one case there was an empress, a female emperor, which is very unusual in Chinese history. But generally when an emperor dies, the next person to take over is the eldest son, and they'll rule until something goes wrong that causes them to get overthrown, a war, civil war, something like that. These two dynasties in particular were two very influential dynasties, which you may remember from your Chinese dynasty song are kind of in the middle of all the Chinese dynasties. Sadly, we don't have time to learn about the others. They were all amazing. Let's get on to it. So Confucianism is one of these underlying philosophies that will undergird or be the foundation for a lot of Chinese society, education, government for a long, long time. So learning about the dynasties is a little bit like learning about Confucianism or vice versa. If you learn about Confucianism, you'll understand a little bit more about Chinese society a little bit better and how their governments worked. So first, it's named after this guy who lived long before the Tang and Song dynasties. He was around about 1,000 years before. His name was Confucius. Around 550 BC he was alive. He was a philosopher, and that's what he looked like. It would be, his ideas would be what the Chinese government was based off of until about 100 years ago. So to give you an idea of how influential this guy's ideas were, his ideas have been around longer than Christianity and have influenced about as many people. So not that this is a religion, but he's a pretty important figure for Chinese civilization, maybe one of the most important, period. The basic lessons that Chinese governments will take from Confucianism will have to do with how to behave and also how to get a job. If you wanted to get a job in a Chinese government for thousands of years, you needed to pass an exam. It was called the civil service exam. Civil just means public or government, and service, of course, means service. So public service, in other words, if you're a public employee, you're a government employee. So this is a government employee exam, basically. And his ideas were based on this Confucian philosophy, or I should say the examples, the exam, that is, was based on Confucian ideas. People would study for this test for years and years and years, and the test took you several days at least. It was a huge deal. It was very difficult, and if you failed, you would hopefully get to take it again. If you passed, you would get a job for life, and it would hopefully probably be a great job. So the civil service exam was a hugely important exam, largely based on Confucianism, and that means that every government employee was really well aware of these Confucian ideas of how to behave. This video you can watch on your own. Once we're done with this, it'll explain more about Confucianism. You'll just watch a couple minutes. The lessons of Confucianism were that success comes from hard work and loyalty to your superiors in family and in government. You'll see that they'll talk about these 5 relationships in the video, but generally the relationships are superior to subordinates, like father to child or husband to wife. Women were not important for most of human history, or were less important than men. Or emperor to subject, so somebody ruling somebody else. And your job is to be a good ruler, and their job is to be a good subject. Your job is to be a good father, and their job is to be a good child. You get the idea. So if everyone in Chinese government follows this philosophy, you can probably get an idea that people in Chinese government are going to be very respectful, they're going to get their jobs done, and they're going to listen when they're told to do stuff. Based on this, you can kind of get a good idea for why Chinese civilization was so successful for a long time. If they're drilling this into people, people are generally going to be pretty efficient, effective, hard workers, and loyal. It's pretty impressive. So the Tang and Song dynasties will revive this idea. It had previously been popular in China, kind of fell away, and then from about 600 on until 1900, it will be the source of Chinese government ideas or philosophies. There's an idea of the 5 rulers or 5 relationships there. They'll show you a bit more about this in the video. Here's some quotes from Confucius. You'll look at some other quotes today probably. One of them you can see, let the ruler be a ruler, the subject a subject, the father a father, and the son a son. In other words, do your job. Whatever your job is, do it. If you're supposed to rule over people, be a ruler and be a good ruler. Here's another example. Direct the people with moral force and regulate them with ritual, and they will possess shame, and moreover, they will be righteous. In other words, if you tell people what's right and wrong, and you can regulate them, don't just tell them what's right and wrong, actually enforce it, then they will be shameful when they don't do the right thing, and even more importantly, they will feel good when they do. So having understood Confucianism then, we can see how this leads to some great accomplishments in various dynasties. The Tang and Song dynasties are sometimes referred to as the golden age of China. We haven't talked about golden ages, but a golden age is when a civilization is doing great. Lots of civilizations have had a golden age, including the United States. Our Gilded Age started in the late 1800s and lasted for who knows how long. I'd say about 20 years in U.S. history when people were very wealthy and successful here. Of course, we still are, but lots of societies go through these golden ages. We'll learn about one for most of the civilizations we'll learn about, at least early on, first semester. So the Tang dynasty is one of these great successful civilizations. One thing they accomplished, as you can see here in the map, is that they expanded China. This is the area that the Tang dynasty owned, this beige area. They will grow the territory of China. The borders you see today that are in black are like the modern day borders, but eventually China will grow from smaller to larger. So while that's not always the case, some dynasties will be smaller. This is a good sign of growth for China. Worth noting that you can see roads here, these pink lines called the Silk Road. These will eventually stretch across all of Asia. We've talked a bit about the Silk Road when we went over our How Much Do You Know, but this is a trade route that stretches all across Asia. So China's not just going to be totally isolated. They're going to trade with lots of other people, sell lots of things, buy lots of things. And a lot of that takes place during this Tang Dynasty time. They will, as I mentioned before, revive the civil service exam that used to be popular. I told you it was a test to become a government employee based on Confucianism, so they'll have a very ordered, efficient government. The image you see here is kind of hard to interpret at first, but of course before the internet, if you wanted to know what you got on your test, you had to wait till your teacher told you. Well, everyone would take this test at the same time, and then eventually their grades would be posted up on a wall for everyone to see who got a government job and who didn't. You can see all these people looking up, kind of frantic, pushing and shoving, crowded, some sad it seems, or maybe excited, relieved, and these people are hoping to find out that they got a job. It's a very important event. The one empress that we have during the entire history of China is Empress Wu Zhao. She is notable for doing a very good job running the Tang Dynasty. I couldn't tell you much detail. It's just notable she has that they had a female empress, just because this was not something that ever happened again in Chinese history. It's mostly patriarchal or male dominated. Finally, they will collapse eventually from invasions and from internal rebellions due to high taxes. Civilizations usually end either from one or the other. You get invaded or you fall apart from the inside out. In the case of the Tang Dynasty, it was both. They were also harder to defend because when you expand, and we'll see this lesson in many cases throughout history, the larger you make your country, the harder it is to defend. So by expanding themselves, they made themselves more vulnerable as well. That partly explains why the Song dynasty was smaller. They were more prosperous than the Tang, but smaller. They will eventually, however, become the largest country in the world by population, and this will be the case until today. For a long time, China has now been the largest country in the world. The main things to know about the Song were their impressive inventions. For one, they created this thing called movable type. If you don't know what movable type is, that's it. Basically, you took each letter, or in the case of Chinese, character, made a stamp out of it, basically, and then you'd put it in trays. So Chinese is often written top to bottom, so each of these is a sentence made of individual tiles set in this tray. And then you would put ink over this, lay some paper on top, pad the paper on top of the ink, and then you'd peel off the paper and have a book, or a page rather. So this was an efficient way of writing. Imagine if you had to write this page over, it would take you forever, but if you just made these things and then placed them in here, you could write anything you wanted without having to use a pen or paper at all. You could put them all in here, and then I guess you'd use your paper and ink, and you'd be able to print many sheets of the same page. What will this lead to? If they can print lots of pages of stuff quickly rather than writing them, how will that change China? I think we talked about this already, but hopefully you can figure out that people will be smarter. They'll have more access to information, so they'll be smarter and hopefully be able to create more amazing things. Another amazing thing that becomes very popular during this time is porcelain. You may know this today as something else called china. There's a reason your expensive, nice plates in your homes that might just be sitting in a cabinet somewhere are called china. It's because they came from China. At least the idea was to have this fancy type of plate that was covered in a glaze. It's not just for a toilet. Toilets are porcelain, but expensive porcelain is like for vases and decorative plates and stuff like that. So Chinese porcelain became very famous during this time, as did paper money. Of course, that makes economic, business, financial exchanges easier. Instead of having to carry around metal coins all the time, it's easier to just deal with paper money, especially because that allows you to do larger trades with higher cost. And finally, not to be missed is the magnetic compass. If you have a compass for sailing, what would that help you do? Hopefully you can guess that it would help you trade more. So lots of Chinese businesses or trade, government trade, will expand during this time as Chinese sailors sail far, far away in very large ships doing business with people in very distant places as far away as Africa. Finally, last thing we'll see today is what this Silk Road looked like. You can see the red lines here stretch from China, which is on the eastern side of the map, the right side, all the way to the west. Now, nobody was really walking this entire distance to do this trading. The trading was done usually between two major cities. So one person might walk back and forth and consistently sell silk, hemp, and cotton to these people who might make it into shirts, who would then sell it to these people who would then make it into, I have no idea what that is. It's a camel, but it appears to be decorative. So maybe toys, I have no idea. So you can see all the different things that people would specialize in making in different places of Asia. And some of that stuff would make their way all the way to Europe. Eventually this unit will learn about the Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks and the Romans eventually got a taste of Chinese silk and porcelain and loved it. So ideas slowly but surely would stretch across Asia, even reach parts of Africa and Europe. So we found, or they have found, that is, archaeologists have found Chinese porcelain, which you can see right there, all the way in sub-Saharan Africa, way down here. Pretty impressive. So the Chinese reach was grand, huge. So Tang and Song ideas will eventually spread throughout lots of these areas as well, whether it's products or ideas. This is partly how we know so much about the Tang and Song dynasties. They left behind quite a lot of stuff over a huge area, and also lots of government documents. That's pretty much it. Watch the video and check on campus for the rest of the instructions for what you need to do today. Sorry I'm not here. Hope you have a great weekend. Bye, Felicia.